Hello, I'm Brad Green, and I'm one of the attorneys at King & Green. Today I'm talking to you about how child support is calculated in Alabama. Obviously, one of the big things that we do in the firm is family law, and part of that will always be child support. It may be done as part of a custody arrangement in a divorce case, or it may be a modification of child support, or it may be establishing paternity and child support in a case where the parties were not married to one another. But the guidelines are the same whether the parents of the child were married or not. In Rule 32 of the Alabama Rules of Judicial Administration, our state Supreme Court has set out the guidelines of how you calculate child support in Alabama. The court requires that a series of forms are filled out by the parties and submitted to the court to show that the child support was calculated within the guidelines. Now, there are instances where a court can deviate from the guidelines or not follow the recommended guideline amount. And oftentimes you do see that in situations where the parties have made an agreement and the parties are asking the court to approve the agreement even though it doesn't follow the guidelines, but they have to give reasons to the court of why the court should not follow the guidelines. Sometimes that has to do with the type of custodial arrangement, if it's a true joint physical custody arrangement where the time is relatively equally split, or if there are extenuating circumstances with the child or with one of the parties that makes following the exact guidelines impractical or not in the best interests of the parties. But generally, in most cases, the guidelines will be followed, and the formula that is set out involves the gross, before taxes that is, gross monthly incomes of both parties. Now, the incomes of the parties, now if this is a situation where the parties are not married to one another, their spouses' incomes do not count in that. Once you take the gross monthly incomes, you place them in the formula and you get the combined total. Then you go to a schedule of basic child support obligations that is set out in the Rule 32 guidelines that says for the number of children at a certain income level, this is the basic amount of monthly child support. Now, the parties' combined amounts, what you take, though, is each party's amount and find the percentage of the combined that each party has. It may be 60-40 or 53-47, but you find what each party's percentage is of the combined. Then under the guidelines, you look at, are there any work-related child care costs that one party is going to have to incur since they have primary custody. And there is a second chart that goes county by county, and for the types of different daycare facilities, tells us what the maximum amount the parties can claim in the child support calculation for daycare costs. Generally about $110 a week at the highest level of daycare is all you can count under the guidelines presently. It may cost a great deal more than that, but that is the maximum under the guidelines that can be placed into the calculation. The other thing that will be placed into the calculation on top of the basic monthly child support obligation that comes from the chart in the guidelines that I just mentioned is the health insurance premium. Now, there's been a recent change by our Supreme Court that drastically alters what we've been doing for years in this regard. Previously to this year, that if a party is carrying insurance on the child, they have a monthly health insurance premium. That health insurance premium may be paying for coverage for not just the parent in that one child, but other children they may have or a new spouse. It didn't matter. The full premium was put into the calculation, and they were getting a credit for that, in essence. The Supreme Court has changed the rules recently on that, whereby you only get to claim the pro rata share of that health insurance premium per month for the children involved in that particular child support calculation. So, for example, if the parties had already been divorced and this was a modification of child support, and the father was covering the single child of the parties under his insurance through his employer, and his monthly premium that he had to pay or was deducted from his paycheck was, say, $500. And that premium covered the father, his new wife, his child that's part of this child support case, but his current wife's 2 children from a previous marriage. So then there would be 5 people under that policy in that hypothetical. And so the revised guidelines say that you would divide the premium by the number of people covered under it. So 500 divided by 5 is $100. And multiply that times the number of children that are part of this child support calculation, which in my hypothetical would just be 1. So you would only place the $100 figure in the health insurance and add that with any daycare costs up to the maximum, if there are daycare costs, and the standard obligation from the chart in Rule 32. And you add that together and you multiply it times the percentage of the non-custodial parent. Remember I said they had to figure out what the percentages were of the combined gross monthly income? Multiply it by the percentage. If that parent is also paying the health insurance premium, you subtract that $100 in the hypothetical that I just gave you, that is that pro rata share of the insurance that they're having to pay. And that is the result of that formula is the child support amount that should be paid per month. Now, again, as I said, there can be deviations from the guidelines based on special circumstances, but once that child support amount is calculated and entered, it can be deducted from the person who's supposed to pay. It can be deducted from their paycheck. Now, that's not through a garnishment, but it can be deducted through what's called an income withholding order. And the application is basically the same. It's deducted right out of the person's paycheck by the employer. It's sent to Montgomery to the Alabama Child Support Payment Center, and then the Child Support Payment Center sends it to the person with primary custody. And an income withholding order is not a negative on your credit. It is very common in Alabama. A lot of people want them. They don't want to deal with the other parent directly. They just want it taken out of their check. So oftentimes there is an income withholding order issued, but from time to time you'll see parties where they decide there won't be an income withholding order. They'll pay directly. And that may be because the party paying it may be self-employed. So there's no employer to deduct it out of the paycheck. They just have to pay directly. So that's a summary of kind of just some basic information about how child support works in Alabama. Online, there are a lot of purported calculators of child support. However, I will say that a lot of these don't take into account the issues involving daycare and the maximum amounts that I mentioned that you can claim via daycare, and that there are only certain types of daycare that you can claim those maximum amounts for. And obviously the recent change in the child support guidelines as it relates to how the health insurance premium is calculated in there. So that's really why an attorney is in the best position to advise you about how the calculation will work in child support. The child support system is not perfect. In fact, it is flawed because there's no real fair way to determine what child support should be in a one-size-fits-all formula, because everyone's case is really different. But we have to have some basic way of figuring out how you would do it, because the goal is to try to treat everyone the same. And so one of the frustrations about child support is that sometimes people feel that they are being overly penalized based on these guidelines, and sometimes the other party may feel that they're being penalized because they're just not receiving enough under the guidelines. So you hear about as much complaints from people receiving child support as people paying child support about our system, our state Supreme Court has continued to tweak the child support formula. There were changes a few years ago that they were trying to make it better, and there's the more recent change about the pro rata share of the insurance. So I hope that helps you understand a little bit about how child support works in Alabama. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact our firm, and we would be happy to help you in any way we can. Thank you.